Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents A Throne from the Ashes by Chloe C. Peñaranda. Narrated by Elisabeth Lagelee. Prologue. Liliana. Liliana didn't know when she fell to her knees, or for how long she bowed in her sorrow. She couldn't feel the ache in her bones against the cold stone of the library anymore. She couldn't feel anything in the embrace of a numbness so detached she may as well have been in another realm, another time. Perhaps if she were, her life, her dreams would still hold the bright hope of a reality within reach. Instead, her once prosperous future had been reduced to nothing but foreboding and uncertainty. Yet it was not for herself that her heart shattered. Her hand moved over her still flat stomach, beginning an idle vacant caress as she pictured the life within, the beautiful girl she carried. Even that secret had been robbed from her, the excitement of guessing, waiting to see whether she would bear a son or daughter. Regardless, she would love the child more than life itself. Protect them. Now, every plan and joyous thought that filled her mind in the moment she confirmed her pregnancy 2 weeks ago required sudden, world-caving reassessment. He couldn't know. Agalor Ashfire couldn't know he sired a daughter. It was an unforgivable, dark thought that escaped in a sob from her painfully hoarse throat. She couldn't afford to think of his heart, or her own. All that mattered now was her. The miracle she and Agalor had conceived was a blessing Liliana didn't think she would ever be granted in this life. But this child was not a gift to 2 doting parents who would love her endlessly. She was a death knell gripped by a twisted, sinister fate before even her first breath. If what Liliana had discovered in the scattered texts above were true, she'd never felt such a burning determination to shield her child from it all. From the world if she had to. To protect her daughter, she would sacrifice everything. She couldn't bear to look at the text on the Great Spirit splayed out on the desk. She had been so full of hope and wonder, in search of a solution that would bind her fate to the one she loved so they could spend an eternity or a simple length of mundane time together. Yet all it took was a second to shatter her prosperous world completely. If she had discovered the consequences of bearing a child conceived of a bloodline blessed and a descendant of Marvellus earlier, if she had known the damned fate she would be condemning the child to, perhaps she might have been more careful. She might have taken all precautions to avoid conception with Agalor, despite believing the chances were so rare they weren't worthy of concern. Liliana's hand circled her flat stomach. Her head bowed low. Wetness trailed her cheeks with the taunting but wondrous images that filled her mind. Their daughter. Agalor would make the most adoring father, and she would look just like him, take after him completely. The bond they would have would be Liliana's life joy to watch. But in her plan to protect her child, she would be robbing them both of that irreplaceable bond. She had to cover her face with the nausea and guilt that consumed her. Now she had a choice to make. An awful, heart-wrenching choice that darkened her soul to think about. She couldn't afford to be selfish, couldn't afford to think from the heart. She had to protect her child. "My love." Agalor's voice rang in concern and snapped her attention upward. Liliana jolted up, the shooting pain in both her legs confirming it had been some time since she collapsed out of utter heartbreak and disbelief. She quickly grabbed some loose parchments, shuffling them over the pages of the book she'd been reading. As she used the desk for support while her legs regained strength and blood flow, Aguilar crossed the space. She was forced to look at him when his hand took her chin. Worry creased his forehead, and it took every ounce of her will not to break down in front of him. He couldn't know. He wouldn't understand. "You've been crying." His arm went around her, and she couldn't stop him when he pulled her to his chest. "Tell me what's the matter, Lily." Liliana didn't sob, but silent tears fell. She couldn't tell him, not without the risk of him stopping her. No one could know about the child she carried. "I love you," she whispered, clinging to him a little tighter, savoring the feeling she didn't want to believe she had to part with. Aguilar's hand smoothed over the hair at her nape. "And I love you, always." He peeled her from his chest, his rough palm sliding along her jaw. "You didn't find anything in your readings today." He meant about finding a way to break the curse of time. Liliana's brow pinched, and she clenched her teeth against the outpour of emotion that threatened to undo her once more. She shook her head weakly, letting him believe that was the sole reason for her upset, as it had been so many times before. "We must keep having faith, Lily," he soothed, so gentle and kind, hopeful. Words he had spoken to her 1,000 times, always the one with so much determination they would conquer time. And she was about to tear it all away from him with what she had to do. "Say that again," she murmured. His hands took her face, pride and love swirling in his hazel gaze, which she held, savoring and memorizing every highlight and hue. He leaned down to touch his lips to hers, a kiss so soft and barely there. When he pulled back, his warm smile was heartbreaking. "Have faith we will find a way, my dear." Her heart swelled to the point she thought it might erupt. It didn't matter. It would be left behind with him. But the word was like a song, a note of him she would carry with her for eternity. Liliana echoed it after him as a promise, a gift he would never know he had given to their child when she left. Keep having faith. Chapter 1. Zayana. The gentle, melodic thrum of a heartbeat did not resonate from her own chest. Zayana Silverfair could hear the organ singing in the human seated in the chair across the room, waiting for her to make a move. Its tempo picked up with each deliberately slow step she took toward him. Any one of the sorry state men in the wretched inn below could have been her victim for the night. But she'd been tracking this one all day. The thrill of the hunt began in the stalking. She'd followed him home, watching from the shadows as he sat down to a warm meal cooked by a seemingly loving wife, 2 children on either side. The sight sickened her. Deceitful happiness. Zayana was glad she had been spared from such horrid emotion. The man had left that night, heading to this very location, where she'd watched him sit down to a game of cards when he barely had enough coin to provide a sustainable meal for his family. Never mind fund his reckless, foolish nighttime addiction of gambling and ale. All it had taken were a series of timed seductive looks and sultry smiles for him to forget what he'd left at home and follow her up here. She'd played this game many times, and she never lost. It always fascinated Zayana, the effect lust had on a man. All her human victims had been submissive to it, controlled by it. so much so they allowed themselves to be led by death in the guise of a beautiful woman. Sayana had glamoured herself with magic to wander the human town, rounding her ears to be accepted, not feared. If her target stopped to think, to look with their eyes and not their cocks, they would realize she far from fit in with their species. Her beauty was her greatest weapon. Her features were too perfect, the skin on her face too porcelain and unmarked by life. Her hair was a spilled inkwell of glistening black, and her eyes, they were perhaps the most distinguishing feature that should have made them question her facade. The core of vibrant purple around her pupils, against her obsidian irises, was almost as bright as the lightning she could conjure from her fingertips. Sayana didn't care for looks. She didn't care for anything. But her looks lured her victim straight to her with no endeavor. As much as she enjoyed a chase, a fight, a challenge, tonight was simply to feed her guilty pleasure, to marvel over the beat of a heart, because her own was as still as stone and cold as ice. If any of her kin knew where she was, what she was doing, she would face brutal punishment. Humans were a drug, their blood a means to strengthen the agility of her kind, nothing more. Yet Sayana stopped feeding on them long ago. It wasn't out of empathy. No, she was incapable of that emotion. She refrained from indulging on the sweetness of their life form, simply because she didn't want to depend on a feed to make her strong. She relished in the silent satisfaction she had made herself into one of the most powerful dark fae without a performance enhancer. When Sayana got close enough, the human man lifted his disgusting hands to touch her. She gripped his wrists before he could, slamming them against the arms of the chair he sat in, pinning them in place and leaning her head in to caress his neck with a breath. He hissed in pain, but reveled in her dominance. While his mind clouded completely with desire for her body, Sayana tuned in to the pulse of his heart. Her ability to alter its rhythm with her actions while he remained oblivious to her game was her eternal delight. Leaning back, she lifted a hand to his chest, angling her iron-tipped middle and pointer fingers to graze their razor-sharp edges along the bare skin above his shirt. The metal guards she sported on those fingers on each hand were a gift from someone she didn't allow herself to think about anymore. They weren't just decorative jewelry or a sentimental feature. They were purposeful, a conductor of her lightning that allowed her to strike with far more precision. Sayana summoned a slight vibration of her bolts. It rippled delightfully through her veins to reach the end of the sharp tips she pressed over the man's heart. He tensed at the minor shock, teeth clenching and fists curling tightly around the armchair. A feline smile crept across her cheeks. She had disturbed the organ's rhythm, but she wanted more. She wanted to hear its pace quicken faster than his lust was sending it. Fear was the ultimate trigger. Tired of the foreplay already, Sayana released the glamour on her heritage, and the man's eyes immediately snapped to the points of her ears. He lurched back in horror, all desire to bed her winking out in an instant. Her cruel smile widened, revealing the sharp, elongated canines she hardly ever felt the need to show off. He tried to get up from his seat, but Sayana released a stronger wave of electricity through her ironclad fingertips that still pinched the surface of his skin. His body spasmed, then fell limp when she stopped. She tipped her head back, closing her eyes and simply tuned in to the racing drum of terror in his chest that drowned out his desperate, pathetic pleas. It wasn't enough. It was fast enough, and she always relished in pushing a heart to its very limit, a pace that might drive the organ keeping the body alive to shut it down instead. With a deep breath, she rolled her shoulders back, basking in the pleasure of releasing her final glamour. Her wings. She felt them gloriously expand from each side of her spine, and she flexed, splaying them to their full length, casting a dark shadow over the man who'd turned ghostly pale, eyes bulging from his sockets. The reek of his soiled pants hid her, and she wrinkled her nose in disgust, glancing down at the darkened patch around his crotch. She groaned in disappointment. "Now you've ruined the mood," she complained, her voice a symphonic enchantment. The man didn't move, paralyzed by fear of the foreign species towering over him. No one knew her kind still existed. They were believed to be long extinct, wiped out by their inferior sister race during the Dark Age. To Zayana, their great unveiling to the world couldn't come quickly enough, and she had taken every opportunity to escape the insufferable confines beneath the Mortis Mountains that had been her prison for centuries. She would have free reign over Ungardia and beyond, when the time was right, as the masters had always taught them. The scandalous gown she'd materialized herself in had also disappeared, and she stood in black leathers with silver accents matching the tone of her blood. The embellishments singled her out as the delegated leader of the Silver Fairs, a position she'd rightfully won through strength and conquer in the blood trials over a century ago. Nothing was given among her kind. Everything was earned. Zayana tucked her taloned wings in tight, bracing her hands on the arms of the chair to lean into the man again. "Your fun may have ended, but mine has just begun." His heartbeat was delightfully erratic, blood throbbing mesmerizingly in the veins of his neck as she angled her head to watch. His breathing was short, and she knew if he didn't match it to the speed of his vital organ, he would fall unconscious. Zayana didn't want that. Lifting her pointer finger, she tore down the length of his neck with her iron claw, missing the crucial artery so he wouldn't bleed out immediately. Watching the crimson glisten and roll over his ruddy skin, she inhaled the sweet scent like finely aged wine, then sent another current of electricity through his chest with her other hand. It killed the scream in his throat, but at least he was now panting hard. "That's better," she cooed. "Please, I have a family." Zayana pulled back, no longer in the mood to play at those words. Her eyes flashed in a white rage while her hand shot out to his chest, braced to plunge straight through and tear out his heart. "How pathetic," she seethed, her iron claws sinking past his skin first, and he let out a choked gasp. "Using them in a bid to save your own miserable life." With more pressure, her other fingertips broke the surface, and she swallowed her dark desire upon feeling the warmth of his blood. The man spluttered but didn't cry out. When she couldn't hold back any longer, her whole hand reached into his chest until her fingers curled around his shuddering heart. She let out a breathless sound, the darkest, most sadistic part of her enjoying the feel of its final beats in her palm. "Trust me, they'll be far better off without you." Zayana retracted her arm, and with it she watched the last jolt of movement of his disconnected heart in her hand. His body fell limp, but she didn't pay the corpse any attention as she marveled over the sticky, dark crimson liquid coating her skin, dripping melodically onto the wood floor. Then, spent of her amusement and desire, she loosened her grip lazily, letting the now boring internal organ roll and thump into the pool of its own blood. The alluring scent of it overpowered the stench of urine, and she drew in a long breath. Every time she was around exposed human blood, she had to fight against past cravings, against the dark beckoning to drink. When she was young, it had never been a choice. Blood was fed to them to create the strongest warriors even out of darklings. If the masters knew how long she had gone without it, she might even be killed. For disobedience or weakness, she wasn't sure what would enrage them more. Perhaps they wouldn't even believe she had won the blood trials, led the silver fairs through training, and kept order and discipline of her leagues under the mountain, all without one drop of human blood in her system. That would forever remain her secret. She didn't want to depend on anything or anyone. Never again. Zayanna looked to the dead man, a gruesome sight for anyone to find with the gaping cavity in his chest. She felt nothing. She never did. Every time she killed, she held the small, ridiculous notion that maybe she would one day feel a flicker of something. But it was impossible when she was a creature born without a heart, without the ability to feel remorse or empathy. She should be grateful for it. Humanity made the species weak, vulnerable, and it was their foolish love that would lose them the war to come. She walked past the man, stopping briefly to wipe her hands on his shirt. Sliding the window pane up, she threw the shutters open. Zayanna perched on the sill and looked up at the glittering starry sky for a few seconds of silent thought. Then she let herself fall before shooting skyward to chase the moon. Chapter 2. Faythe. Faythe Ashfire had masterfully tuned her senses to track only two things: sapphire and steel. She ducked low, pivoting to avoid the razor's edge that swiped for her. Her hand hooked behind her back, clashing swords with Reylan when he left no pause for her to reorient herself. She caught his eye for a split second over her shoulder, and it was a small triumph to glimpse his flash of surprise. Fist clamped around the hilt, Faythe twisted smoothly, steel singing against steel. A devious smile curved her lips when it brought them face to face between locked blades. "You're slowing, General." Faythe pushed off against him, and he allowed her to lead with a series of offense attacks.
"Maybe I'm just going easy on you, Princess."
The title was a taunt, one that pushed her to wipe the smug look off his face. Where she was focused and calculated her steps, Reylan deflected so gracefully it was an effort not to admire the way he moved and his muscles flexed. Though parrying against her, there was an assessment in his eyes that tracked Faythe, studying her sequence, battle moves he had taught her many times over her 2 months in Ryanel. Losing herself in combat was the best distraction Faythe knew from being homesick over her friends in High Pharaoh, and from the confrontation with her father, which she had actively avoided in her cowardice. "If that helps you sleep at night," she brushed him off, stepping left, left, flashing steel at a new angle every time. They darted around the ring, an exhilarating dance of danger and passion, while the world around them faded away.
"Is that an offer?"
They twisted and turned. Faythe was panting, and at his words she lost focus for a split second in her incredulity. Raylan's blade halted abruptly, mere inches from her thigh.
"You're leaving your left side exposed again."
"Your tactics are spineless," she grumbled, kicking his blade and going on the offense once more. His deep chuckle was equally as distracting.
Your right elbow is dropping.
Faythe clenched her teeth, trying to correct her error.
You're shifting your weight too recklessly. Focus, Faythe.
I am focused. Sweat beaded on her forehead. It wouldn't be long before she tunneled so far down into her lethal calm that she pushed her body to its physical limits.
You're not.
Raylan's voice was unwavering as he easily anticipated and blocked every one of her attacks.
You're thinking of who's watching and letting fear of judgment tense your poise.
His last sentence echoed privately in her mind. There was a strange tether that ran between Faythe and the general, one that often gave her a glimpse of his feelings and sent words so effortlessly between them. It was more than her ability. Reylan seemed able to channel back to her far easier than a loud projection of thought. Faythe had no explanation for it, other than to assume it was a result of the power they'd shared in the throne room in High Pharaoh. She never spoke of it, but she couldn't deny the lingering bond wrapped her in a sense of contentment. It unnerved her, the thought that he felt it too, but had yet to say anything. Perhaps he didn't want it. Faythe's eyes flashed upward at his observation just for a second. It was enough. Reylan seized the opportunity to claim victory. A quick knock to her open left side, and she was falling. Though just as fast, a strong arm hooked around her back, saving her from the injury of sprawling to the ground. Faythe's hands lashed out on instinct, curling tightly into Raylan's shirt as he caught her. When the maneuver had processed, Faythe exhaled hard, coming back to her full senses. Sapphire eyes claimed her entirely as she stared at him in bewilderment, their faces so close they shared breath. Those few seconds slowed, despite him being quick to straighten with her. His arm didn't drop immediately. His palm flattened against her back, fingers grazing over her spine, the slow trail of his hand ending at her waist before his touch left her, and she unfurled her fists. They never broke eye contact. Faythe couldn't be sure if her heart was thundering from dwindling combat or the prickling sensation that crawled over her skin at his closeness. There was a low shift in Raylan's voice as he said,
"You're not done."
His gaze flicked sideward, and Faythe's clouded mind cleared completely. She stifled a groan, eyeing the impressive assault course she was always drilled to complete before their session was up. At first she had insisted, wanting to advance on her agility as best she could. Now she cursed herself for that foolish bout of determination. Her muscles protested. Her breath speared her throat.
"Unless you're too tired, Your Highness."
Reylan chided at her hesitation. Faythe shot him a glare, then straightened and rolled her shoulders. She allowed her frown to turn to a smirk, a flare of defiance that flashed a twinkle of delight in the general's eye before she took off. There was nothing that ignited her drive, her passion and strength, more than when she stared into the face of a threat or challenge. Adrenaline was a dangerous drug. Her craving for it never curbed. Angling her body to fall, Faythe slid against the polished floor to narrowly avoid the hook of a low bar. Then she twisted, pushing to her feet again before taking her next breath. Her mind had long trained her body to disconnect from the physical exertion in her focused state. The freedom of movement in her new attire was glorious, an upgrade from her previous Ryanel fighting suit. She didn't think it were possible, but it felt even more weightless than the last and featured various concealed slots for weapons. With a flick of her wrist, a dagger snapped free, and she hurled it at the moving target that shot out for her. The dagger hit the inner circle, and the target fell backward to signal her success. There was no pause of victory. She pushed on. Throwing her arms out for balance, Faythe stealthily walked a thin beam over a deep pit that would surely break her bones if she fell. She didn't look down. Her feet crossed over each other without hesitation. She was no
Sample complete. Ready to continue?